my friends. Gadigal Warain Nura to Gadigal land. Wallamabemi. Inyana. Bailawa. Ngay Nailang. Gudri Darabara Yanu. Welcome to Gadigal Warain country. I'd like to acknowledge also the elders, past, present and future. Our elders here this evening and any First Nations people. So my name's Auntie Rhonda Dixon Grosvenor and I'm a Gadigal, traditional descendant and elder, also of the Bidjigal people, Dharawal speaking people out at La Perouse, of the Darug people out in Western Sydney, around Penrith area, and also of the Yuin people on the far south coast of New South Wales. So our people have been here over 80,000 years. I come from an activist family. My father, the late Dr. Charles Chicka Dixon, was an activist who grew up at Wallaga Lake Mission, and he was a wharfie and a union rep. We're still working with the wharfies, MUA mob. His father was a wharfie, and also my grandson. And we did a project with the MUA mob last year, and we took a little boat out, Stingray, on the harbour, where our mob talked about the islands and how the harbour was created, how our mob used to be all around the land, and in the night you could see the fires burning. There's still middens and there's still rock art all around the harbour area. So it's just lovely to be able to talk about our culture and our history, and it's still here. So I just finished my master's at UTS, an education module on the history of our people, and I interviewed elders at LAPA and knowledge holders, and so it's an education module and a podcast. Thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, good. Oh, good. So, yes, so it's just up on the internet, I noticed. Today's the Senate to some of my friends. I'm also the elder in residence with Afters. I've been there for 3 years. And so they're going to take the education module on. I think it's important that us as First Nations people, who are the first to be colonised in Australia, that we tell our story, because it's been written a lot by non-Aboriginal people. But for us to tell our story is very important, so that we can tell our messages about the impact of colonisation on our people. But not only that, it's about resurgence and renewal of our culture, our languages, our art, our dance. So I've been asked to go over to China next year to the Wuhan Biennale. They're going to show our film, my film that I done, walking the river out to the ocean, and they want me to speak over there, and they're going to show the film along with my friend Claire, who finished her PhD on the Cooks River, and she did it under the water where I walked the Cooks River. And it's also going to Canada in June, and I'll be talking at the World Council for Indigenous People next year in November at Auckland. So it's going to be a big year for this old girl. But I'm very honoured, and I think it's important that we are all sharing our stories, and that we are role models and leaders for. I have 16 grandchildren, and I do work with the youth, and that in Reby and different centres. So I think it's very important because they're our future. And my PhD will be on solidarity, resurgence, and also connecting youth back to country, because culture and spirituality is very, very important, connecting to country. So thank you for having me and listening to me. It's going to be a great evening, and I'd like to acknowledge our Lord Mayor that's here tonight, and it's just lovely to see you here also, to be, supporting the environment I know you have for many years, and thank you for that. So thank you for listening to me, and Yanu, enjoy.
Thank you so much, Auntie Rhonda, for that lovely welcome to your country, and safe travels over the next year. It sounds like you've got a lot coming up. I'd also like to acknowledge the land that we're on and pay my respects as well. So there's some familiar faces in the room tonight, and there's also some new faces, which is really lovely to see. And for those of you who don't know us, the Nature Conservation Council is the peak body for environment and conservation groups around New South Wales. We represent close to 200 community groups around the state who are working on environmental issues either in their local area or at a statewide level. We are largely a membership-based organisation. We also work on a number of statewide environmental issues across climate and energy, biodiversity and nature, and rivers and wetlands. And we're really interested in building the grassroots movement across New South Wales and advocating for change for better outcomes for the environment and climate at state level in particular, but also at local government and federal government levels. So we're really pleased to be here tonight launching our local government election platform, and we've been working with the membership and across our working groups and experts within the NCC network around developing these policy asks. So we're really pleased to be able to share those with you tonight. Because we're an independent organisation that is not tied to any government funding or corporate funding or anything like that, we do rely on donations. So I appreciate you all making a donation to be here this evening. And if you would like to donate further to NCC, you can talk to Ange and Sam at the back about making a donation. So why are we here tonight? Well, we're 1 month out from the local government elections, and I know that we've got a bunch of people online and in the room, some of whom are candidates for the elections themselves. So you would well know the dates that are rapidly approaching. It's an important opportunity to highlight the prominence of nature and climate during the election campaign and to get better outcomes for nature. And tonight we'll be asking you all to commit to endorsing the platform, but also to take it back to your local area, to your local candidates, and to ask them to commit to implementing some of the policy asks within the platform. It is an important time to secure wins for nature and the climate, and local government does have a lot within their power that they can do to protect and restore nature. So this evening we're going to hear from the Lord Mayor, Clover Moore. The Lord Mayor will then join me in conversation about the role of local council in protecting nature and the climate. I'll then go through an overview of our election platform and take you through the various sections, and then I'll take questions at the end about the platform and the upcoming elections. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the Lord Mayor, Clover Moore, who has served as an independent member of the New South Wales Parliament from March 1988 to September 2012, and was concurrently Lord Mayor and the member for Sydney for 8 years. Clover Moore was elected the Lord Mayor of Sydney in 2004, the first popularly elected woman to lead the City of Sydney. She was re-elected for her 5th term in 2021. As Lord Mayor, Clover initiated Sustainable Sydney 2030, an internationally renowned long-term plan to secure Sydney's future as a leading green, livable and creative city. The plan includes ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse emissions. In 2007, the city became the first government in Australia to be carbon neutral and has made history by by becoming the first major city in the world to power its operations entirely by renewable energy. I also want to mention that it's thanks to the City of Sydney's support that the greenhouse is affordable for groups like NCC, so that we can afford office space here and other groups taking action on climate change. So that support is really critical for us to have access to these spaces. So thank you so much to the Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Jackie, and hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to accept your invitation to come tonight. I want to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora, the traditional custodians of our land, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. And I also acknowledge the people of the many nations who live in our city. And I want to acknowledge the Nature Conservation Council members, the supporters, and other environmental groups who continue to campaign, advocate, and to fight for our natural world. I worked quite closely with you in my 24 years in the State Parliament, as being a bit of a lone voice for the environment at that time. And I want to say that it's really important you stay the course. The work you do is really important. And I am very pleased that this event is being held here in Greenhouse. We at the City are very proud of and excited about Greenhouse. It is the biggest climate technology hub in Australasia. You probably all know this, but I don't mind repeating it to you because I'm very, very keen about this. It comprises 3 floors of affordable office space where about 400 innovators, ecopreneurs, investors, governments and climate action groups, academics, researchers and committed corporates can collaborate and come up with solutions to the world's most serious climate problems. And I think it's going to help the world achieve net zero emissions. Thank you. And I'm proud of the role the city played in this. We negotiated 3 floors with Lendlease as part of the development application for this site, for the Salesforce development. And that negotiation resulted in us achieving 3 floors for 20 years for this purpose. And then we made the grant available to Greenhouse to be able to actually set up. So we had the vision, it's what we wanted to do. We were really pleased about Greenhouse taking over the hub, and I keep saying to them, we're expecting great things from them. There's lots of pressure, I know, but how exciting to have this happening here, and happening in the really top end of the global city too. That this work's happening here about our future. So getting to the topic of tonight, next month's local government elections, and they're very important. Mayors and councillors are close to their communities, and they can tailor solutions to meet local needs, and they can explain the importance and the benefits of setting net zero targets, partnering with residents and businesses to cut emissions, protect trees and canopy cover, plant those trees and plant more native trees and vegetation. They can construct separated cycleways and accessible footpaths so people have safe and easy alternatives to driving. They can reduce waste, they can increase recycling, they can transition to the circular economy. The list goes on. There's so much that council can do. The great pity about local council, though, is that it's treated with a bit of contempt by state government. Not a bit of contempt, much contempt, I think, by those other levels of government who think they are so important, and indeed they are, because they're making decisions about our lives all the time. But I really think it's important that they work constructively with local government too, because local government it's the tier of government that people mostly interact with, and it's a tier of government that creates the community, the environment in which we live and work. So I am very passionate about local government, really. And when the government decided to pass legislation, it was called the Get Clover Bill, to say you couldn't be Lord Mayor and local member, I actually chose the city. I chose local government over the state government because I thought there was just so much important work we had to do at the City Council. So that's my background there. And I want to say that Sydney has been at the forefront of action on climate since I became mayor. We have led and we have influenced other governments, and we have ambitious targets and policies, advocacy and environmental partnerships. We were, as Jackie has said, the first carbon neutral government in Australia in 2007. We set targets to reduce our operational emissions by 70% by 2030, and we actually achieved that goal in 2021, 9 years early. From 2020, we've had 100% of our electricity has come from renewable sources, and we have an ambitious target of net zero by 2035. And that is not just in our operations. That is a very ambitious target because it's right across the city, and it's going to involve all the businesses and all the residents and all the workers. It's net zero emissions for the whole of the city, not just in our own operations. But I have to say that we set hard targets and we've met them all. So this is what you can do. And I like to say that to other governments too, but they've actually got to set the targets. They've got to believe in this, doing this. And of course, we've got better governments now, but we had coalition governments for a very long time. And it just wasn't even on their radar, and it was very distressing. So to help us meet at this target of net zero by 2030, we're tackling it with the biggest sources of emissions, as we've done indeed with Sustainable Sydney 2030. So principally, our emissions are coming from our commercial buildings, from transport and from street lighting. And as 75% of emissions are in our cities, it's incredibly important that we're taking the action that we do. We have, to address the commercial buildings, we've partnered with owners of 64% of Sydney's office space, buildings like this, owners like this. It's known as the Better Buildings Partnership, and they have actually collectively reduced their emissions by 95% from their 2006 baseline. And it's actually the first time they've ever worked together. They're the big owners around the city. They've got a long-term vision, not just like in the government that might have a 4-year vision. They're thinking about the future. I first approached them in 2008. They came on board with that partnership in 2011, and they have worked really hard. And interestingly, it's the first time they've ever worked together and they're achieving amazing results for us and the planet. So also for new office blocks, hotels and major retail developments, we've introduced building standards that will improve energy and achieve net zero standards from 2026. And those developers are on notice that that's what they're going to have to do. And we are really pleased that developers are already submitting proposals for new developments with net zero, and that they're doing that 2 years ahead of time. So street lighting is the largest source of electricity used for councils. At the city, it accounts for nearly 40%. In 2015, we became the first council in Australia to convert street lights to energy-efficient LEDs. And together with Ausgrid, we've converted 17,000 street lights to LEDs. This is our biggest carbon reduction project and saves the city and Ausgrid $2 million a year. But there's more to that story. Our first C40, the first C40 session I went to as mayor, was in 2007 in New York. Do you all know what the C40 is? Well, the C40 is really quite fantastic. It's made up of cities from around the world who are committing to work together to address climate change. We meet every 2 years, and our staff work together in the interim period. And at that first meeting I went to, we had a presentation from Los Angeles. And they were the first city in the United States to introduce LEDs. And they presented a really compelling case. We came back and said that Los Angeles had made amazing achievements by changing their street lighting to LEDs, and we would like to do the same. Talk to Ausgrid, talk to the state government, and no, Ausgrid and the state government weren't interested. So we wanted them to go and do a trial with us. So we did the trial ourselves, and we saw that it was going to work. And so then we introduced the lights in the City of Sydney are about half Ausgrid, about half the City of Sydney in terms of ownership. So we converted all our streetlights to LED, and we found in the first couple of years that we were saving $800,000 a year, as well as having much better lighting. One would think that would be a pretty convincing argument for Ausgrid to agree to also convert their lights. And they thought it was a good idea, but they weren't prepared to put money in to do it. And so we paid them to do it because it was worth our while in the amount of emissions we were going to reduce across the city. So all the lights in the City of Sydney are now LEDs, paid for by the City of Sydney, half of them owned by Ausgrid, or actually slightly more than half. So now we can say that together we've converted 17,000 streetlights to LED. And this is the biggest carbon reduction project, and it saves the city and Ausgrid $2 million a year. So that's what's happening around your city here. But more than that, our partnership with the Southern Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils, which is called SSROC, have made it possible, our partnership there with them has made it possible to encourage joint procurement for 29 other councils to convert their streetlights to energy efficient LEDs too. This has converted 75%, more than 210,000 streetlights across Greater Sydney, and they will result in 69% of energy savings by 2026 compared with the peak of 2008, and the cost savings will be at least $94 million a year. I like to always give that monetary sum because it talks to government. Government really should have the same goals as all the people in this room do about emissions, but those arguments are also very powerful. Our second highest and fastest growing source of CO2 pre-COVID was generating 20% of emissions. And that, of course, is transport. The city's commitment to light rail, we don't do transport, unlike other city governments, but we certainly put money into it, and we certainly lobbied very hard for it. And that commitment to light rail, the cycle network that we've been building and creating a city for walking reduces emissions, and that provides clean and efficient alternatives to driving and improves productivity and people's health. In 2004, when I became mayor, there were no separated cycleways in Sydney, and there was only 1% of cycling. I don't know if any of you can remember back to then, but I'm very proud to tell you now there are 25 kilometres of safe separated cycleways, 66 kilometres of shared paths. We'd rather make it all separated, but it's not always possible. And I really like this number, 10,000 people are now cycling to the City of Sydney. That's the equivalent of 10 full trains and 166 full buses. And they get to work happier because they've been cycling. I always say to people what's really important about cycling, and really it's fun and it's good, and it brings you into the office a much happier person, and it takes you home to your family a much happier person too. So, and over the next 4 years, we're going to be constructing another 7.3 kilometres of cycleways, and we're really working hard to get those other councils surrounding us to connect up to that. And we've put in requests to both the federal and state governments over the years to fund those councils to be able to do that work because they don't have the same resources we do. So that's something important that you can be raising in your local government campaign. In terms of greening the city, and I hope you've noticed that the city is greener, we've planted 17,000 street trees. We've created 180 new or upgraded parks, including the 40-hectare Sydney Park, which once was a garbage tip, as I'm sure you all know. And we've installed Sydney's, and in Sydney Park, we installed Sydney's largest stormwater harvesting system. And of course, that's drought-proofing those beautiful wetlands that we've created there, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. Over the next 10 years, we're planning to create or upgrade another 60 more parks. And we have actually increased our canopy cover, going from 15% to 21%, which I'm told is the equivalent of 80 Sydney cricket grounds. But what I'm really pleased about is that it's been a very high priority for us, and we are in fact the only city in Australia to increase canopy last decade. So the next step in our war against waste, and another council first for New South Wales, I like this story, involves the recycling of food scraps by feeding them to maggots and converting their manure into protein-rich animal feed and fertiliser. This process is actually carbon positive because the byproducts create a sustainable carbon-free animal feed for cattle, and fertiliser, and it's truly circular. This is a significant because food scraps make up a third of waste in general rubbish bins, and decomposing food waste makes up 8% of global emissions. We hope to pave the way for other councils to meet the state government's mandate to provide food and garden waste collection to every household by 2030. So, to conclude, most people support actions to improve the environment and reduce emissions. So mayors, councillors and councils should be representatives for nature and the climate, as well as for their communities. The Nature Conservation Council is a great advocate. Your priorities targeting next month's council elections should help candidates to have the confidence to find useful partnerships and to push for climate and environment actions, even when it feels that everyone is against you. I've certainly had, News Corp and 2GB and various people in the media against me on all the things that we have done. But we have had the courage of our convictions, and you have to lobby the other levels of government to do the same and not just back off as soon as, the Daily Telegraph or 2GB starts to be critical. And I want to finish with the words of Tony Benn, the progressive British MP who said, "It's the same each time with progress. First they ignore you, then they say you're mad, then they say you're dangerous, and then there's a pause, and then you can't find anyone who disagrees with you." So that's certainly been my experience on light rail, on the cycleways. So in my introductory words, I wasn't going to focus on the questions you're going to be asking me. I thought we'd talk about that when we're having our conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Lots in there for different councils to think about when it comes to protecting the environment and working to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. In there, there was a lot in there about electricity usage and moving away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy and clean energy sources. And you sort of also mentioned quite a bit about advocating to state government. Just wondering if you can dig in a bit more there around the role of councils across New South Wales when it comes to protecting nature and acting on climate. What do you really see as the niche there as compared to other levels of government?
Well, I think there's a lot councils can do, and there's a lot councils should do. And it's, I think, a really important role to protect nature and the climate. Councils develop local environmental plans and development control plans, which we use to assess development proposals on private land. And we manage public land and facilities like parks and local roads and footpaths, which we at the city landscape. We plant trees. And so these are really important. Councils also can manage and regulate important services like waste management. They deal with building approvals. All these things go towards creating the environment that people live in, and so it's really important that we realise that the greening of the city, the greening of our local areas, and our cities is really a very serious responsibility, and we at the city think of it as significant infrastructure and a very, very important part of life. But you would know there are some councils where they're coping with residents who cut down trees in the middle of the night and don't want trees planted. I still have issues like that. Because we've planted everything we could, we've probably planted out the public areas, and so now we've moved into doing the median strips. And actually the first one we did was in Madison Street in Redfern, and that was in the Daily Telegraph too. So we feed them stories. So in areas like Rosebery, for example, in the city, that's unusual as part of an urban environment because it's really quite suburban in a way, and it's housing and it's very wide streets. So we're planting median strips down there, and people are complaining that they can't get to their driveway, or they have to go a longer route to get to their driveway because they all have off-street parking, which again is very unusual in the city. So, people don't, and people say they drop leaves and they make a mess. I was door knocking today and someone was complaining about a jacaranda tree. Look at everything on the road. And then I said, and they'll have purple flowers in summer and that'll be beautiful. There'll be a lovely blue curtain carpet on your street. And so I think it's a really important thing for councils to do. And I think it's really important for councils to educate people about how important this is for the environment, for the bird life, for our health, and with accelerating global warming for our survival. As global warming accelerates, people living in our cities, particularly elderly people and young people, are going to really suffer from heat island effect. And our trees are really significant in bringing that temperature down. So it really is one of the most important things that councils should be doing. And what distresses me every time I see it, and every time I see a premier or a prime minister talking about the housing crisis and how they're going to build more houses, and they have images of those grey roofs in those streets with not a tree and all facing west and with air conditioners and I think what a sentence to hell for those people that are going to be living there. And that what governments should be doing is mandating that all councils must be promoting the right sort of architecture and the right sort of tree planting, because that's what everyone deserves. People do not deserve to go and live in places with no trees and very large houses and grey roofs and stinking heat in summer. It's going to be terrible for them in the future.
Yeah, it's a human health, framing it as a human health issue.
It's human health.
Important, yeah.
So that's just some of the things that are important about this local government election. You've got to have people in there who understand that global climate change is happening now. When I first went to those conferences at the C40 back in 2007, this was all talked about, but now I see it happening and I think it's very distressing. And I understand why some people are deciding not to have children, because they're too worried about the future. And I think everyone who gets elected to any level of government now has to make an absolutely strong commitment to take every possible action on addressing climate change as a top priority.
Yeah, and interesting, some of the things you were saying there are around sort of adaptation and mitigation, and we're not just talking about prevention of climate impacts anymore. We're actually living them.
We're having to live with it, and we've got to accelerate our actions too, because it's happening. I mean, we're seeing and reading about the terrible bushfires in Greece right now, in Athens. Well, that's going to be happening back in Sydney probably at Christmas time.
Yeah, it's a bit concerning to think about. And one of the things in the election platform, when you get a chance to have a look at it, is around managing the ecology of the landscape for bushfire. And, it's particularly relevant for regional areas and for our folks zooming in from regional councils, is how we manage land for bushfire from a way that is, in a way that's ecologically sustainable as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And you did mention quite a lot of...
so I've got a couple of other...
Oh, yeah,
yes,
please.
So I've talked about trees and protecting canopy and separated cycleways and accessible landscape footpaths for people to walk. And because they need trees to have shade when they're walking as well. In reducing waste, increasing recycling, transitioning to a circular economy, rehabilitating wetlands, rivers and waterways, installing EV chargers and converting fleets to electric vehicles and many more. So they're just some of the things that councils can do.
Yeah.
And also lots of councils are doing really good things, and they don't deserve to be treated by contempt by other levels of government. In fact, I think many councils show up other levels of government by actually getting on and doing a lot of stuff. And I remember in one of those conferences in America meeting Bill Clinton, and he talked to a group of mayors and he said, "Oh, you mayors, I just envy you. You get up in the morning and you want to do stuff." And that's the lovely thing about local government, and that's one of the things that make it so compelling and interesting for people who are involved. You do stuff. You see the results of the buildings you've approved. You see the trees that you've planted. You see the parks you've created. You see, your community being looked after. It can be terrific, I think.
And it's the same. That's how a lot of our community groups feel. It's the thing they see every day, and often the calls that we get at NCC are from people who are really worried about the patch of bushland at the end of their street and things like that. Where
we're custodians. we're custodians of this place where we live, and we should be looking after it better, and our levels of government should be looking after it better. And those levels of government should be working closely with us. And I think that's what local councils can do. So I hope we get some really good people being involved in councils, and I hope we have really good community groups that work with them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I know some of those folks are listening tonight. So if you are running for council in your local area, thank you. And I hope that the policy platform gives you some things to work towards for sure. You mentioned a lot of the successes that you've had at the City of Sydney Council, which is really refreshing to hear. And obviously you've done decades of work to achieve those. What are some of the wins that you've seen in other councils across New South Wales and some of the other wins at City of Sydney that you might not have mentioned?
So I think one of the hardest wins that we've had, well, two of the hardest ones, but two of the most successful ones in the City of Sydney have been getting the light rail. That's transformed the city and given people an experience of it. And often I find when you're wanting to introduce change, you have to try and take people on the journey, and it's often very hard. But once they then experience the change, they realise that it's quite good. It's why I like reading out Tony Benn's quotation. But, I did our first bike lane in about 2008, I think it was. It was Burke Street, Redfern, Surrey Hills.
I remember.
And there's a lot of opposition. And the unfortunate thing for me at the time, I was in both state parliament and council, and I was having elections every 2 years. And people were saying to me, "Sure, you really want to do this?" And I said, "Yes, we've got to do it," because we'd been lobbied very hard by residents and by a lot of executives who work in the city who wanted to cycle to work. And we knew that it was one of the significant things we as a council, as a level of government, could do to help get emissions down. So we're absolutely committed to doing it. But it was as though, and when I opened the first bike lane in Burke Street, I had Channel 7 there, I had News Corp there, and it was as though I was opening a nuclear reactor rather than a bike lane. And that sounds really funny now, and how could people have been like that? But if you read the Sydney Morning Herald today and you look at the local government section, you'll see that there are a group of Paddington people who are saying that the bike lane that's going to go into Oxford Street, which is one of the most dangerous routes for cycling, and it's a really good idea for a bike lane to be going in there. We're doing half and we're progressing ours. The state's meant to be doing the other half, and they've really not done it very well. And I guess they were a new government coming in, but they haven't done the consultation very well or taken people on the journey. And anyway, so it's stalled. So the people in Paddington now are saying that it's Trojan horse, it's a conspiracy, it's going to change. You read the article, they're quite mad. And these are people like Catherine Greiner and various other significant Sydney-siders who don't want a bike lane in Oxford Street, who live in Paddington. I mean, it's crazy stuff. And that's, we've now got a whole bike network in. Except poor old Paddington, Oxford Street hasn't. And anyway, so it's hard to do stuff. But I don't think we have a choice with climate change. And so when I was having to face those roomfuls of people who are very worried about having a bike lane in their street, I just put it to them that, we've all got to do our bit in whatever way we can to save the planet, and this is one thing we can do. Emissions from transport is really, really significant. It's the second highest significant impact in the city. And so if we can get emissions down by getting people on bikes, that is a really powerful thing to be doing. So I always put it in that context.
Yeah.
And won people over, and that's how we did it. But it was really a lot of hard work. And some of the people who are absolutely adamant and against it, I now see cycling along with their kids on their little cycles beside them, and so we just seem to be innately conservative and not wanting change.
And then when it comes,
climate change is happening, and it's going to be the most significant change ever in humanity, and we can't muck around with this.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned cycleways and active transport, because as somebody who used to live in Sydney and in the last couple of years moved to a city where we don't have cycleways, when you don't have access to that infrastructure, you truly, truly miss it. It's so critical.
When I used to go to Copenhagen and Amsterdam and just see the cycleways, and I'll just tell you one little story in relation to that. The C40 was in Copenhagen at the time. The national leaders were meeting for COP, and the Lord Mayor of Copenhagen invited me to do an earth hour with her. Do you remember when we were doing earth hour to try and get people to think about getting emissions down? And so we're going to do an earth hour in Copenhagen. And so we did. I gave a speech in English and they all seemed to understand it and gave me a big clap. And I was very pleased with it. It was absolutely freezing and we're all outdoors. And then the Copenhagen Lord Mayor did her little speech and then all the lights went off right across the city. And it was quite dramatic because it started to snow.
Oh, beautiful.
So at the end, and everyone, the Lord Mayor thanked everyone for coming, and all those people who'd been standing in this public square all went over and got their bikes and wiped all the snow off the bikes and got on the bikes and cycled off. And I thought, wow. And then the next morning, it had snowed all night. And the next morning, our hotel was on the major route in and out of the city. I saw the snowplow. And what do you think the snowplow was doing? The snowplow was clearing the cycleway before it cleared the road. Yeah. And I thought, wow, that they've got their values and their priorities in terms of active transport.
Yeah.
So that's been what I've held up in my mind as trying to achieve in
so
doing
good to
our
have
work.
Those things to work towards, isn't
it? But they've had 30 years on us. They started this 30 years ago, and Jan Gill, who advised us on Sydney, said it's just one car at a time, one parking place at a time. Just start doing it and then they won't notice until you've got all this area for people and for bikes.
Yeah, what a beautiful image of folks riding off into the snow. I love that.
Just wiping it off, the snow off their seats and getting on and cycling off, all the snow coming down. It was amazing.
Gorgeous. And my final question is for people here tonight or who might be zooming in who are thinking about getting involved in their local government elections and advocating for more environmental action and more climate action. How important are constituents when it comes to advocating to councils to act? And do you have any tips for anyone who might be new to advocating to their candidates?
Oh, I think it's incredibly important, and there are numbers of things I think that should be happening. First of all, I think the state government should acknowledge that councillors play an important role, and it shouldn't just be seen as a retirement job. It should be seen, often it's people with young children who see needs in the local area and the community. It's how I first got involved. The parks were terrible, the roads were terrible. It was quite dangerous, and so I took up my first petition and I walked the streets with a child in a pram and a child holding on and to get signatures, etc. And that's how I started. So, and I think currently, if you do run for council, you don't get a salary, and you get a sort of a very small stipend, really. And most people now need 2 incomes to survive. And so you either you give up your income so you can do the work for the community that you really believe in, or not. And so usually you just end up with older people who've done their life's work and have time to do it. But we really need a mix of men and women, young and old, and people have experience and a passion for their local area, for their streets, for their parks, for, the facilities for their children, for looking after their environment, and I think we all do have a bit of a passion for the area we live in and what it looks like and how it feels. And that can make such a difference to how you operate in life too, what the environment is like where you live and where you work. It's really important. And so government should acknowledge that it's important and give not a large salary, but give a livable salary to any councillor that's going to run for public office. And I'm saying that constantly to the Minister for Local Government, and I have been saying that constantly all of my political life. The other thing I think local government should have is constitutional recognition, so that it's not always worried about doing good or progressive things and then being sacked by the state government for your trouble. And that's happened in the past too. I think councils should be able to be progressive and you know, understand what's needed and lobby hard for it, and you know, become a thorn in the side of government to get things done. Work with organisations like the NCC, but I think councillors should also have a living wage so that they can earn that and do a really good job, because council takes up a lot of time, you know, a lot of nights, a lot of meetings, and you do it because you love it and you really want to improve the area where you live and look after your community. 'Tis important and it should be recognised as such. So I think organisations like NCC, all of you should lobby to enable councillors to have a living wage so they can do a good job, and that the best people are attracted to local government, and not just as people are attracted to political parties to get into government to be part of a powerful party. You know, you want individuals who care about your area, who have a passion for your area and want to be able to stand up for it. So I think that's really important.
We'll have to add a living wage to our policy platform. That's a really good point.
Yes.
Well, your passion for your local area and for the environment and climate certainly shines through. Thank you so much for being here tonight to share some of the experiences and wins that you've had, and for imparting your advice on anyone who's looking to lobby their council or run for council. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Please, everyone join me in thanking the Lord Mayor, Clover Moore. Thank you for that. I now get to talk you through our election platform, which I've mentioned a few times this evening. And we've heard from the Lord Mayor and you know, generally the importance of local council when it comes to protecting the environment and the climate, and the role that they can play, and also, you know, the role that you can play in advocating to your candidates and to your local council for better environmental outcomes. So the policy platform that we've pulled together, because I've just pushed the next arrow. Oh, we'll see if it comes up. So we've identified some key areas, and the Lord Mayor has also identified some of those areas as well across bushland, green spaces and trees, climate and energy, water quality and conservation, and also waste. So under those various headings, we've identified different things that local governments can be doing to better protect nature and conserve water and play their part in slashing carbon pollution and tackling climate change. So the policy platform was developed, as I mentioned, through a policy workshop with our member groups and policy experts across our member groups and our working groups to really try and take on what our supporters want to see across urban councils and also regional councils. And when looking at the policy platform and thinking about how you can use it to advocate for what you want to see in your local area, I think taking that uniqueness of different local government areas into account is really important. And so this is really a tool where you can pick and choose what are the things that are relevant to your local council. And some areas will be far more advanced than others, or further ahead than others when it comes to setting different targets and different aspects of the plan. So as I mentioned, those are the sections that we've identified as being really critical. So I'll quickly just run through those different areas, but please, you know, have a deeper read in your own time. Think about the things that your council's already doing, what the areas for improvement are, what are the things that are relevant to your local areas, really, and pull those out. So across bushland, green space and trees, ambitious targets for bushland and urban canopy tree cover, which we've heard a lot about the importance of that for biodiversity, but also for climate mitigation and adaptation is really critical. Protecting and restoring local bushland, which I know a lot of NCC members and supporters are really passionate about. And we've heard about the ways that local government can play a really important role with those. Establishing wildlife corridors, using native plant species in the LGA, pet containment, which can have really great outcomes for protecting local wildlife, and nature positive bushfire management, which is one that we're really passionate about at Nature Conservation Council, and how we manage, particularly obviously regional areas, how we manage for ecology and protecting biodiversity while being prepared and bushfire preparedness. On climate and energy, cleaning up council operations, we've heard how City of Sydney has set emissions reduction and implemented emissions reduction targets and the importance of streetlights and so on for slashing emissions, but also saving a lot of money, which is really critical for a lot of councils. Playing a support role for locals, businesses and organisations to also slash their emissions. Cleaning up local transport. We heard that was the second biggest source of climate emissions for the City of Sydney, and I'm sure it's the same for many councils across the state. Climate adaptation, which again relates to that, the issue of canopy, tree canopy. Supporting the renewable energy transition and actively supporting national and international movements to reduce emissions. And I think a few years ago we heard a lot about climate emergency declarations. There's a lot of symbolic as well as really practical things that local governments can be doing. And one thing that I just wanted to do a bit of a deeper dive on when it comes to climate and energy is around gas connections in new builds. So councils in New South Wales can alter their development control plans so that new homes and businesses must be electric with no gas or wood-fire heating. And this is a sort of campaign that's really taken off across New South Wales where local government can leverage their power and influence to be able to do that, which is really important for climate action, but as we've heard, human health and yeah, and it's great to see that City of Sydney's done that. And actually on my next slide here, you can see the councils that have done that. So Sydney's done it across residential and commercial buildings, which is really, really wonderful to see. And credit where it's due, this is the work of 350.org, which is a national climate organisation that has been really actively running this campaign and doing a lot of work to push local councils to ban gas. So yeah, I'd encourage you, I'm sorry the text on that's a little bit small, but the councils that are either in the phases of exploring and researching or have already implemented are Lane Cove, Waverley, Parramatta, City of Sydney, Canada Bay, Canterbury, Bankstown, Inner West, Ryde, Newcastle and Wallara. So I'd encourage you, if your council's not on that list, to push them to ban new gas and to head along to the 350 website to have a look at that campaign. And they've got some actually really amazing resources, everything down to the wording of the council motion that the council can put forward and how they can adjust those plans. So I think that's a really tangible one that has impact, like the impact of councils doing that is really quite amazing and far-reaching. So on water quality and conservation, ensure that we have diverse and drought-resilient water systems, reduce water waste. Often we only hear about, reducing water waste in times of drought and when water restrictions are in place, but certainly there are many ways that we can be tightening up water waste and restoring rivers, wetlands and waterways. And we heard about the amazing work that the City of Sydney is doing with wetlands in its LGA, which are so critical for biodiversity, but also really important carbon sinks. Wetlands store a lot of carbon and restoring wetlands and protecting wetlands, again, really important for mitigating climate impacts. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the final area is waste. So, we've heard about circular economies, and how the role that local government plays in terms of recycling and reducing waste, transitioning to a circular economy, really important, minimising plastic pollution, really critical, and opposing the use of waste to energy incinerators, which is something that is being considered in some areas and something that we're particularly concerned about. Nope, okay. And in terms of actually using we're up, here we go. We're on. Using the election platform as a tool, there's some really key things that you can do. So a QR code is going to come up on the screen when the buzzer catches up. Oh, there we go. Now I've got too carried away. Oh, well, while it's there, scan the code and that'll link you to the page to have a look at the platform in more detail, and you can sign the pledge there. And when you sign the pledge once you've had a read through the platform and sign the pledge, you can sign as an individual supporter or as a candidate. And that's really important. So if you are a candidate yourself and you want to endorse the platform, please do. But if you want to advocate in your local government area for your candidates to endorse the platform, you can send them the link and they can sign up as a candidate, and then we can collate a list of who those candidates are who have committed to the platform, which is obviously a really powerful tool after the elections to then back that up with implementation and say, these are the things that you committed to advocating for in the lead up to the election, and now you've got a seat on council and let's get to work. So really important tool for that. And in terms of how we want to see the platform being used as a tool, awareness is really important, just getting the message out there. If you've got access to local networks, whether it's on social media or email, or you're involved in a local community group, let people know about the platform, get the word out. You might be interested in hosting a candidates forum. Depending on your local government area, it's getting a bit close to the date, but having a public event of some description where you can raise the profile of these issues and get your candidates to commit, or organise a meeting with local candidates, or a lot of the time they'll be handing out at the train station, and go up to them and have a chat to them about the platform and ask them to commit. So that's the platform. Those are the ways that we can raise the profile of these issues and see some action at a local government level, and really ensure that we're seeing action on nature protection and climate at all levels of government. So it's a really important opportunity. As we've heard, local government elections matter. You can have an influence on what your candidates commit to. There's a really critical role there in protecting nature and implementing strategies to restore nature as in the local government areas. They can advocate to state and federal government, as we've heard from the Lord Mayor, for changes that might be outside of their control. So even if there are things beyond their remit, they still have a really important role to play in advocating for those changes. So please scan the code, have a read of the platform, think about the parts that are relevant for your LGA, reach out to your candidates and ask them to endorse the platform.